Children of Bodom.
I love working, I get such kick out of it. Plus, if anything, it can,
If you're a modern metal fan, you probably come across the band Children of Bodom at some point. This was a melodic death metal band from the mid-90s all the way until 2019 and was created by Alexi Laiho, a dark Finnish guitarist and composer, known for his power and black metal influence. Alexi, also known as Wildchild, was critically acclaimed to be one of the best melodic death metal guitarists of the time, creating some of the most unique and iconic dark melodic riffs and guitar solos while also being Children of Bodom's main screamer or vocalist. This wasn't an easy job, but Alexi was able to maintain the impressive reputation throughout his entire career. But what made Alexi so great? Why does he hold such a high legacy in the metal community? Well, I'm going to take you through a deep dive into the dark depths of Alexi Laiho and his wonderfully eerie musical aspects in music theory. We'll be swimming through a large chunk of his discography and deeply analyzing his most iconic music theory aspects. So sit back, turn off the lights, because we're going in the deep with this one. Alexi had some musical training at the age of 7 by playing the violin. This was only for a few years until he picked up the guitar at age 11, and Alexi grew up with influences like Judas Priest, Manowar, and Halloween. This led to the formation of the band In Earth, which was the original name for Children of Bodom. There's some really cool footage out there of Alexi playing Vivaldi, and there's some other ones of him explaining arpeggios.
Basically, you do the arpeggio, and then you tap the E note from here.
In these cases, it really shows how smart and talented Alexi was just by a video of him describing exactly what he was doing. And I'm going to do my best to capture as much of that as I can. Alexi had a very large discography, and although I can't cover everything, I'm going to cover his work in as best of chronological order as I can, because even though most of his career was with Children of Bodom, he still had other projects and appeared on a few records, so keep that in mind. Looking through his discography, he was first a member of an experimental metal band called TOLK. You could see a cool video of him in 1997 where he was only 17 shredding on an Ibanez, in which he used this guitar for Something Wild by Children of Bodom and Beware the Heavens by Synergy. We'll talk about that group later, but in the meantime, we don't have a whole lot to grab from TOLK, but it clearly set him up for more success in the future. Children of Bodom had their first concert in '97, opening for a black metal band from Norway. In which the guitarist of this band said that they heard him from a ways away and they said, "Holy shit, what is this? It sounds like Yngwie Malmsteen on speed." This was the beginning of Alexi's impressive career, but what exactly made him so successful? More specifically, what about his music was so successful? I'm going to take you through this dark path of grim chord progressions and dark intervals and melodies, and so much more that shaped Alexi Laiho to be considered a legacy in the death metal world. Beginning with COB, Alexi was also a member of a side project called Synergy with his future wife and keyboardist, Kimberly Gross. Synergy was an interesting band. Considering Alexi was on lead guitar and not vocals, they had power metal, neoclassical, and symphonic elements. In their first album, To Hell and Back, we can start seeing his style develop. Using a flat 5 during the riff around measure 60, he sets us up for a superb guitar solo in E minor. The first section of the solo is the band's other guitarist, while the second half is Alexi. If you listen closely, their guitarist Roop, his solo is in E minor, but Alexi's is in A minor. This is a common way of modulation, considering their key signatures are nearly identical with just one sharp difference. The dead giveaway is the F major sweep near the end. Now let's briefly look at this guitar harmony section in the chords underneath. So if we're in the key of E, we have a 1 chord, a 7, a 6, a 7, and a 5. Using a 7 into a 5 is a really good way of adding suspense because the 7 chord implies that we aren't raising the 7th scale degree. or at least we're not getting into that dominant chord, and using harmonies like thirds and fifths sound really classical in this section, kind of like some classic Bach. At the time, power metal was using this sort of style a lot. Bands like Stratovarius, Halloween, etc. use this riff, harmony, and style often. The fourth track on the record, Lead to Rest, features a beautiful guitar intro that we need to briefly talk about, as it sets us up for more of his style in the future. Using a D standard tuning, we hear a strange G minor chord progression. On a first listen, we can already tell some weird stuff is happening, and mostly has to do with the second guitar part, basically outlining chromaticism. Guitar 1 is simply doing a 1 add 9, and then into a 4 chord, into a D sus4, and then back to our 1. Putting them together, the chords can be outlined as follows: G minor, F sharp minor, B flat, C, E flat 7, D7, and G minor. Going from G minor to F sharp minor is a common dark chord progression. Composers like Danny Elfman use this a lot for their dark fantasy films. And then using an E flat 7 makes us feel like we want B flat to be tonicized, which wouldn't be too odd considering it's the relative major of G minor. And then using a D7 almost as a deceptive cadence for finally tonicizing G minor was very clever. Honestly, chord progressions like this aren't really seen that much in metal. Rather, it's a very film score-like progression, and it worked really well. Their album Beware the Heavens is definitely a more symphonic power metal sounding record, and often uses similar chord progressions like the last one we discussed. The album in itself flows together nicely, and I notice most of the songs are in F sharp minor. The only odd one out is the 8th track, titled Pulsation. This instrumental is almost like a twisted and dark version of Jason Becker's Air. Using very dark chord progressions and harmonies in G sharp minor. This is a key not many dare to attempt unless tuning a half step down, and in this case, that's exactly what they did. Aside from the fact that most of the Guitar Pro tabs don't have all of it written, you can still hear some very pretty sounding harmonies with diminished chords. Now that we've covered synergy, we can now make our way into Alexi and his dark harmonies in his main act, Children of Bodom. I'm very excited to go through these albums because they feature some incredible songs that show his legacy. Diving right into their first album in '97, Something Wild set the bar extremely high for Children of Bodom, as it has a darker, more death metal sound compared to Synergy. Starting with Deadnight Warrior, this is one of my personal favorites for how dark and strange it sounds. The intro sounds like a horror movie. And going into the song is a spooky guitar riff with an organ synthesizer backing it up. The main riff in the beginning uses an E minor chord into a D sharp minor chord, which at this point is nothing really new, but from this song alone you can tell Alexi really knows how to outline arpeggios. We can also hear a minor 6 chord or C minor around the 36 measure. This is called chord borrowing, and chord borrowing is when we borrow chords from other keys, often parallel keys. This tune also has some really cool vibraphone parts, using a strange F sharp, F natural, D to E combo in octaves at 1 minute and 32 seconds in. The way they use a D sharp diminished chord at the end to cadence C sharp minor, it's very strange how we started in F sharp minor and then got to C sharp minor. This is the thing that we're going to have to pay attention to, is the modulation that Alexi is known for. Now we can't go through this album without touching Lake Bodom. The song has some strange modulation aspects, because the first minute and a half, we've already explored 3 keys, F sharp minor, C sharp minor, G sharp minor, and eventually, at 1 minute and 57 seconds, we're in E minor. Alexi is crazy with modulation, kind of in the way Danny Elfman orchestrates his work. One can argue calling modulation is useless at this case. when it's more just using tons of minor keys and minor chords. The motif in the beginning is played again later in the song, but it's transposed to B minor instead of F sharp minor. So the thing about Alexi is he isn't afraid to write and sing in different keys. It's especially important to note that when singing and screaming and growling, you still have to follow and hit the right notes to make the song sound good. And Alexi seems to have no issues in adapting in these songs when he's constantly modulating and using different keys, and it's very impressive to be able to do this. Their next album, Follow the Reaper, was released in the year 2000, and it seems in this one we get much more melodic and slightly less darkness in terms of the harmonies and the chord progressions. But from asking Reddit, Everytime I Die and Kissing the Shadows seem to be the most interesting ones to talk about. Everytime I Die seems to mostly be a standard natural minor sort of song, and hold the key of D minor until the end, in which we end up in G minor. Again, closely related keys are the easiest to modulate to, and in this case, these two keys only have a 1 flat difference in the key signature. Kissing the Shadows seems to be a very melodic G minor tune, with using a harpsichord and doing Children of Bodom signature accents while the harpsichord plays a nice melody. I say that this album sounds less dark than something wild because the modulation parts seem to be using relative keys and closely related keys, as well as using less of the raised 7th and flat 5, tritones, etc. My favorite melody of this album has to be Children of Decadence. This intro is a cool minor 6 interval carrying the dissonance, and in general, I think this song has the catchiest hook of them all in the chorus. Going forward into Are You Dead Yet, I've started noticing a reoccurring pattern with each album. Something Wild features most songs in F sharp minor. Follow the Reaper features most songs in D minor. Are You Dead Yet features most songs in C minor. This is often because the tunings Alexi used, reflecting the keys to most songs. However, even though Alexi started in these keys, he still modulated in most of them at some point, as we discussed, and we will see much more in the future. You see, most bands are known for picking one or two of their favorite keys and staying there for most of their discography. For example, most of Metallica songs are in E minor. Most of Bullet for My Valentine songs are in C minor. Motionless in White stays in B flat minor a lot, Guns N' Roses stays in E flat minor a lot, etc. Children of Bodom is a great example of using different keys and tunings. Another band I'd highly compare this to is Opeth. Both bands use different tunings or keys often, therefore making their large discographies sound much more interesting than others. Anyways, Are You Dead Yet seems to be Children of Bodom's most commercially successful record. Using some synth melodies, heavy riffs, and catchy hooks, the opening track, Living Deadbeat, features some really good melodies throughout, while also still following the classic guitar synth dual harmonies and switch-offs. If you want more of a sound like this, I'd highly recommend Symphony X. They're less heavy, but instrumentally share a lot of similarities. Anyways, this song stays in C minor until the end, whereas now we're in the key of D minor. Modulation at the end of a song is a very effective way to emphasize hooks in the listener's brain. It adds a sort of epicness to the listener. You know, not to plug, but my band uses this technique in a song called Only Angels Know on our first record, where we start in E minor and then we get to G minor. I'm bringing this up because this is something that you guys should try with your own songs. The second track, Are You Dead Yet, is their most commercially successful hit of all time. As of now on Spotify, it sits with over 56 million streams. Their other single, In Your Face, is also a great song to look at because of its use of harmonic minor. Being that the synth is playing a C harmonic minor melody, this isn't anything too new, but it still works really well considering the chords underneath follow it really well. Oddly enough though, at measure 145, we go from C minor into C sharp minor. This is a really strange way of modulating because those keys aren't really that closely related other than the fact that the root notes are right next to each other. But this is a solid technique to use to spice up especially guitar solos, as playing in the same key can often be heard as dull and boring. Jazz musicians are used to this, but us metal musicians, we haven't really had this too much since the last 10 to 20 years. Their next album, Blooddrunk, was released in 2007, which wasn't as successful as Are You Dead Yet, but still holds up to be a pretty solid album. But the main complaint of this record was from long-term fans, and they didn't really like their new sound and style. This album features most of what we've already discussed, like modulation, as in their third song, Lobotomy. That is based in D minor but lands in B minor, a little over halfway throughout the song. I think the thing that gets overlooked in metal is how important melody is, and sometimes metal fans want strict heaviness. This is something that happened to Metallica back when the Black album was released. They went a little more mainstream, and as a result, their long-term fans got annoyed. Because fans, especially long-term, they like things to stay the same. But of course, as a result of releasing a new style and sound, they appealed to a different audience. And then of course, their older fans who originally disliked it, it sort of grows on them. And this is another case for Children of Bodom, where some of their more commercially successful records, maybe their older fans didn't like it as much, but attracted a lot of their newer fans. Hate Crew Deathroll in 2008 was a much more successful record while maintaining heaviness and melodic ideas. It clearly has thrash influence, but it definitely is still more death metal sounding with power metal ideas. Their second track on the record, 6 Pounder, features a fantastic way to write heavy riffs and using the flat 2. The key of the song being C minor holds a D flat or C sharp, giving it a solid added dissonance. You can hear a temporary riff in B minor over some of the guitar solo, which again is something I highly recommend experimenting with as long as you understand the best ways to modulate and return back to your original key. However, one of the strangest motifs in this record has to be the intro to Angels Don't Kill. The song was highly requested in the Reddit thread, but basically, the synth in the beginning is following another flat 2 line in the key of C minor, using a C5 to a C sharp 5 and then a B flat 5. The strangest part is the synth chords in the back outline a C major chord and then a B flat minor chord. The thing composers like to do is to keep us in suspense, and in this case, omitting the third and keeping them as 5 chords makes us assume that they're going to be minor triads, but we've been fooled. This is a common thing that composers would do back in the day, where they wouldn't really give us anything like thirds or sixths because it would automatically give us away if we're in a major or a minor key. Now, this song is still in a minor key, but I think it's very interesting that we temporarily had C major. And going back to the point of composing in different keys, this song, Triple Corpse Hammer Throw, holds the key of A minor for most of the song and occasionally hits B minor. The solo is pretty insane considering there's so much chromaticism. Alexi goes pretty crazy on the solo and adds a great build up for the end of the song in B minor. Bodom released plenty of live and compilation albums in between, by the way, and eventually landed in 2010 with Relentless Reckless Forever. It is the first Children of Bodom album to not have a song with Bodom in the title. This album also did very solid, and Alexi speaks about the song Was It Worth It as one of their most party-esque style songs, meaning it sounded very mainstream, at least for Children of Bodom and death metal. That could be said for a good chunk of this record, as they have songs in E minor, which is a very typical classic metal key. Their next record was mostly described as a black metal-ish, according to the drummer at the time. This album, titled Halo of Blood, was released in 2013. This is very evident in the song Halo of Blood. It has typical black metal elements of blast beats with dark minor chords and intervals. Black metal music theory typically consists of using closely related minor scales next to each other. For example, you can use A minor into A flat minor or maybe into G minor. In this case, we're mostly hearing E minor to G minor. This is known as chromatic mediant chord progressions. Chromatic mediants are used for darkness. You basically play one minor chord and then you build another minor chord off of that third of the previous minor chord. It's better to see it this way. If we have an E minor triad, E, G, B, we can go to the third of that chord, G, and then build a minor triad off of that. In that case, that would be G, B, flat, D. And you can keep doing that going forward and forward. You can hear this in Dream Theater's Octavarium in the synthesizer in the very beginning. The fifth track, Bodom Blue Moon, uses some really cool flat 5 stuff in E minor in the beginning. And we also get some cool C minor work after that, which sets us up for the rest of the song. Now down to our last Children of Bodom albums. We're now entering 2015, in which we get I Worship Chaos, their first album that features some songs of drop C tuning. Some of the coolest riffs are featured on this record, such as I Worship Chaos, featuring some B minor and C sharp minor phrasing. Alexi is a master of darkness. As we've already discussed, he used a lot of flat 5s, chromaticism, constant modulation, and it's honestly insane, and I'm really surprised no one really talks about it that much. I mean, in this song, the keys that are explored, B minor, C sharp minor, D sharp minor, this is not something that we commonly hear in metal, and I think that's part of why Children of Bodom stuck out. Even in Suicide Bomber, we get A flat minor, F sharp minor. This man was nothing shy of a genius composer, and he wasn't afraid of any of these keys. And here we are, the final Children of Bodom album. In 2019, Hexed was released just before we lost Alexi. The song This Road is one of my personal favorites because of the harmonic motif in the chorus. The song Under Glass and Clover can be argued to be in E major, which is extremely rare in metal to be in a major key, but it seemed to work for a little while, but it seems like they were kind of dancing in between E major and its relative minor, C sharp. Hecate's Nightmare is another really weird song that features the flat 5 and C sharp minor in the intro. And a lot of these other songs feature a lot of what we've already discussed with modulation, altered scales, and some really dark riffs and melodies. This album is a very solid record to end Children of Bodom. I'd highly recommend this orchestral piece of a melody of Children of Bodom. It's honestly really well done and deserves a lot of attention. The final piece of discography we have from Alexi comes from Bodom After Midnight. Although it's only one EP, it's very solid and features some really good mixing compared to what we've previously had with Children of Bodom. These songs almost sound like Arch Enemy in some ways, but that could be because the mix is a little bit more modern, but with more black metal and darker vibes, of course. One of my favorite chords in this EP is from Payback's a Bit, which around 1 minute and 40 seconds we hear in F sharp minor, we get a flat 4 chord, aka B flat minor. The EP is only 3 songs, and what was the last thing that we had before Alexi's passing at the end of 2020. Well guys, this is the end of the video. I really enjoyed analyzing all of Alexi's work, and I learned so much throughout the process, and I hope you did the same. Please leave a comment and let me know, what is your favorite part of Alexi Laiho's career? Is it Children of Bodom? Is it Synergy? Is it something else? Let me know. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.